So did anyone stay up for the never-ending election last night? I watched part of it and then I was like, no, this is never going to end. I'm done. What about you guys online? Did you guys stay up for that?
That's exactly what I did. I think we made it till about 10:30 and then we're
Yeah.
like, okay, we're done.
Yeah, that's about when I stopped. I was like, yeah, this isn't going to end anytime soon. And I kind of figured when they were saying they were going to let states like Pennsylvania mail theirs in for like the next 3 days yet. Like this is not going to end anytime soon.
That's exactly what I thought. When I heard the word Friday, I'm like,
Yeah,
done.
no. Exactly. I was with you there and I was like, oh, I'll just periodically check up on it on my phone and that's it.
Yeah.
Sam's not with us yet. Let's see. Sadie. The one person that I haven't figured out your name and how to remember it yet. I'll probably remember it tomorrow now since you're the only one I had left. Okay, well, I'm glad that those of you that are here and made it on time did make it on time. Today's lesson is really short. Tomorrow's, on the other hand, is a bit long. It's probably going to take the entire time. Today we're going over photography and tomorrow's film. Photography leads into the invention of film eventually in the late 1800s. Photography is used to make films. So before we can get into film, we do have to have some basic understanding of photography. For both photography and film, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently from what we have been. Normally, we have been going through the different types of mediums. For example, with drawing, we went over charcoal, pencil, all of those, same with painting and with printmaking yesterday. Photography and film, though, since they are a bit newer as far as our inventions go, there's not like different kinds. With photography, there's black and white and color. That's it. For film, it's just a progression of new technologies throughout time that have been used. So for both photography and film, what we're going to be doing is taking a bit of a historical approach or historiography, looking at the history of both of those mediums and how they've progressed to today. Actually, I need to screen share. So we're going to start off right off with history. Sorry, those of you that I know don't like history. I'm sorry. There's not really a better way to do this better than. So the earliest form of photography was something called the camera obscura, although it has nothing to do with like taking a permanent picture. It just has the fancy word camera in it. It makes it sound like it does. But what a camera obscura is, we briefly talked about it with linear perspective. It's the idea of using a mirror to reflect an image back to you to make sure that your lines are correct on your drawing, to make sure that your perspective is correct. So what it was is it was a little box with a hole in it in a mirror that you would hold out in front. So there was no lasting permanent image with a camera obscura. It's not until two inventors, Joseph Niepce and Louis Daguerre, in the 1800s begin trying to figure out how to permanently fix an image to a piece of paper or a piece of metal or something like that, that true photography is invented. So both Niepce and Daguerre were working in France, very close to each other. They both, however, had a different take on how they were going to try to invent photography. Niepce referred to his invention as heliography or sun writing. The exposure time was 8 hours and it used paper. It was chemicals, like we talked about yesterday, those photosensitive chemicals would be applied to a piece of paper and then exposed to sunlight. So certain images would leave a lasting impression depending on shadow and light onto that piece of paper. Louis Daguerre referred to his invention as a daguerreotype. The exposure time for this one also took several hours, and it was done with a metal plate. So we have Niepce, who was using paper, and Daguerre, who was using metal. Which one do you think was going to have a clearer, more pristine image? The paper, why? Maybe, but we're starting off with black and white, so keep that in mind. Metal? Raise your hand if you say paper. We're taking a vote. Raise your hand if you say metal. So we do have more people that say metal. Why do you guys say metal? Yeah, the intaglio prints were a lot clearer. That's a great idea to refer to that. You could get a lot more details. What about the texture of paper? Thin, what else? What's paper made of? Maybe we need to take a paper making class. It's made of pulp and fibers. Yeah. You don't just cut down tree pieces. You have to shred it and then press it with different liquids, and it makes a fiber. So paper is more akin to fabric than it is a tree in all actuality. So knowing that paper is fibrous, are metal plates fibrous? So what do you think texture has to do with that? How smooth things are going to come out, right? So if paper is fibrous and rough and has texture, your image is probably also going to have texture, which is exactly what we see here with Niepce heliography. It's super blurry and fuzzy because paper is fuzzy. In comparison, here we have Daguerre's on a metal plate. His was done almost 10 years later. And they were literally working a few blocks away from each other. There was a rush to see who could finish the invention first and get it patented first. You'll notice that both of these are still lifes. So this is just an image out of Windows. And this is just an image of random objects on a table. Reason being is, once again, that really long exposure time. It was several hours. If you were going to take a picture of a living thing, it would have to stand still for several hours. I don't know many things that stand completely still for hours on end. Eventually, Daguerre's daguerreotypes were the winners of that competition on who could best invent photography and get it patented. Daguerre's invention was made public in 1839, and the patent was sold to several different countries. The United States was able to get a hold of the patent thanks to Samuel B. Morse. Does anyone know what he invented? Morse code, yes. The dude that invented Morse code happened to be best friends with Louis Daguerre. So on one trip, Samuel B. Morse went to hang out with Daguerre, and they were sharing their ideas for inventions with each other, and Samuel B. Morse was able to nab a hold of the schematics on how to invent or reproduce a daguerreotype back in the United States, and he took it back with him. So in the United States, we used to begin with daguerreotypes. And right here is another daguerre photograph. This is considered to be the very first image of a human being. Once again, exposure time was several hours. This street is actually a super busy street in Paris. It's just that with the constant moving of cars and people, well, then not cars, just wagons and people, you couldn't really capture any of them. But right here, there is a man at a shoe shine station. So he must have been standing still long enough for that exposure to take place. No one knows who he is, by the way. Someone always asks me, who is it? I'm like, it's just some random dude getting his shoes shined. I don't know. But yeah, that's the very first person to ever be captured on film. So shortly after the invention of photography was shared to the public, artists started to use it as a new art medium. However, at first it is important to keep in mind that some artists were not very receptive to the idea of photography. Think, for example, if you are a landscape painter and then all of a sudden photography comes along and can take an actual picture of that landscape. You're competing with something that can take a picture of what it actually looks like. There's no way that humans could compete with that. And so artists felt very threatened when photography first came out. They thought they were going to lose their jobs, basically. However, it was later learned that you can play with exposure times, lights and shadows. If you remember our image of Abraham Lincoln from when we were looking at lights earlier in the semester, you can also mess around with creating your own compositions, and you can overlay different photographs to get interesting compositions. So later on, after playing around with it a little bit, artists discovered that you could actually fake a photograph to make it look more interesting or to change up the composition. Fun story is that the public didn't realize that you could fake photography when it was first invented. For a really long time, they believed that's how things actually looked. A great example of that is a group of artists called the Greensboro Boys. They would go around during the Civil War to photograph the aftermath of the battles. People thought they were just taking pictures right off the bat. They didn't realize that the Greensboro Boys were actually stacking the bodies on top of each other to make gigantic piles to make it look a lot more morbid and intense, and then taking the photographs and selling them to people. So they didn't realize that they were being staged. Early photography, the regular public didn't realize that you could fake things, which is funny to think about now, because now there's like Photoshop and everything like that. An early artist that played with the medium of photography is Julia Margaret Cameron. It's been a while since we've talked about a woman, but she was one of the first artists to play around with that medium. She liked to play around with different exposure times as well as the different lights and shadows that you can capture with photography. And here are a couple of different examples of her photographs. So you have a portrait of her husband and a portrait of herself. So here you can see the intense light coming in from a window, casting a dark shadow on the other side. Same with this one. When photography was first invented and you were taking pictures of people, it was just straight on. There was no like trickery or playing with lights and darks. So she was the first one to really experiment with that idea. She would also take pictures of women and children frequently, and she would have them leave the little staged area partway through the exposure time to give them kind of a ghostly appearance, which is cool to look at. I mean, today those things aren't really impressive to us because they're pretty easy to pull off, especially like just intense lights and darks. But when photography was first invented, it was a pretty big deal. Another artist that pioneered photography was Alfred Stieglitz. Alfred Stieglitz was working in New York in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and his main medium of choice was photography. His wife's probably more well known than he is at this point. His wife was Georgia O'Keeffe. She's the one that did really large flower paintings. And she's pretty popular in New Mexico. There's several museums dedicated to her in New Mexico. But he was pioneering photography and trying to get it accepted as an actual art medium. Because once again, when photography first came out, people were not artists were not very receptive to it. So it did take a while for them to actually accept it as an art medium. His most famous artwork is Steerage from 1907, which is pictured there. He also created his own magazine called Camera Works, which showcased different contemporary artists for that time period and their artworks, mostly showcasing photography. He also owned his own gallery in New York, which showcased photography to once again try and get it accepted as an actual art medium. And here we do see that steerage photograph. What do you guys notice about that photo? Once again, it's from 1907. Yeah, it's a black and white photograph, yeah. What else? There's something interesting going on with the composition. I have to blow it up for the people in here. Kind of small on the screen. What's happening on the top versus the bottom? Huh? Well, there's men and women on top. They do. Yeah. What do we know was happening in the United States in the early 1900s? Anyone? Nobody knows US history? Come on. Immigration, yes. So here we see the wealthy, middle, higher class US Americans. And then down below, you see the poor immigrants that are working their way to the United States. This is a boat, so they are on a boat immigrating into the country right here. And what he did is he used the actual boat structure to divide the social classes here. So this is literally an illustration of the social stratification that was happening in the United States in the early 1900s. This is another example of artists arranging their composition to try and make it more interesting and fool people. Henry Cartier-Bresson, this is a great example too of people not realizing you could fake things. He would play around with photography. At this point, the exposure time has gone down to just a few seconds thanks to something called a flash. So now we have flash photography at this point in time. So what he did for this image is he waited for a rain shower and then he went onto a roof and he started jumping around in puddles. When this first came out, people thought he was actually like running on water. I know it looks very sad right now. He also did one where it looked like he was jumping off the side of a building and flying, but truth be told, it was just a one story and he was just like falling onto a mattress out of a window. They just caught it at the right moment to where it looked like he was flying. And people thought he really was flying, which is sad, but yeah. It's just another great example of early photography and people not realizing you could fake it. So photography in the early 1900s, like we just saw with Stieglitz steerage, was often used to try and create social awareness of different issues, specifically issues that were happening in the United States. And it was a key tool for muckrakers to use. Has anyone ever heard that word muckraker before? My gosh, y'all need to take a history class here. Do you remember what it is? So usually when they teach it in high school, muckraker is associated to The Jungle, which is a book about Chicago meatpacking industry in the early 1900s, well, 1920s, during the Gilded Age. So in the early 1920s, the United States was going through a lot of immigration. We also had a large amount of factories being created, and we were making a lot of money as a country. We were very well off. However, it was not made aware to the upper class how different the lower class was living in the United States, specifically those immigrants. They didn't realize that they were living in tenement houses with 30 people to one room. So it's things like the muckrakers that helped bring to light the issues that were happening in the United States, like ridiculously long work hours for little pay, no safe working conditions, child labor, things like that. And we are going to take a little side story here, side trip, to look at the art of muckraker Jacob Riis. Jacob Riis was a photographer. Once again, the invention of flash photography is one of the things that makes these, I would say, reporters at this point, capable of doing this job. So my people online, Courtney, can you nod your head if you can see this? Thank you. Okay. And I tried to play with the sound yesterday. It worked for the second hour, but it seems to keep reverting back to the really bad quality. So you'll just have to let me know if it's messed up, although I should be able to tell right away. Hang on.
Don't let the attention to detail lead you to believe that a Honda is a delicate machine. You'd be wrong. Underneath.
I hate commercial ads. A long one. Oh, come on. Seriously? Okay. We're going to go the other way then. Because I know that there's a video.
Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Killen. I have my own medical practice.
In many cities, slums are growing uncontrollably. Multiple families crammed into one small tenement room. Human waste pours into the streets, alleys, and open courtyards.
People were crowded in. There were windowless tenements. Sometimes you had no internal plumbing, just privies in the basement, in the backyard. And the Lower East Side during these years was the single most crowded place in the entire world.
Jacob Riis, Danish immigrant, crime reporter, photographer. He gets leads, the stories from Chief Inspector Burns. Now he's about to expose the hell of tenements. Jacob Riis knows what it's like to be poor. 15 years ago, he lost his job in a stock market crash. It's midnight, but Riis has a new technology that will change the public perception of poverty. An explosive powder that produces enough light to photograph in the dark. This is one of the first ever photographs of slumber. It shocks millions.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jacob A. Reese, and this is how the other half live and die in New York City.
Magazines refuse to print his work, so Reese puts on his own magic lantern shows. His mission, to show America's wealthy something they've never seen before. Filth and desperation on their doorstep.
In this block, 9 dead were carried out this year alone. 5 baby coffins.
What he demonstrated was that there was another reality, that all that prosperity didn't trickle down all the way to the bottom, and there was some deplorable living conditions, and this country was not just forced to confront those conditions, but then was moved to begin to deal with them.
So what he was able to do with photography is use it as a means to educate Americans on the social issues that were happening so that laws could be created to try and prevent those issues from continuing. So here is that really famous interior of a tenement. Like they said, there was no indoor plumbing, no windows, no air conditioning hadn't been invented at this point, neither had heating. They would use a stove to heat, which was very dangerous when there's no windows or ventilation, to use a coal stove to heat with. And there'd be 20, 30 people all crammed in this one room, and it was extremely unhealthy. If one person got sick, then everyone was going to get sick. And it's important to keep in mind that they were going through their own pandemic at this point in history. So yeah, not a great time to be crowded in a room with 30 people. He also brought to the forefront the issue of child labor and creating child labor laws. And another artist that used photography as a means for social change was Dorothea Lange. This is her really famous photograph of the migrant mother. She was working not in the 1920s, but in the 30s during the Great Depression in the Dust Bowl. And this series of works was part of the Works Progress Administration. I mentioned that yesterday or the day before with the frescoes, the one that's in Odessa. So in the 30s and 40s, the United States needed to create jobs for people because everyone was jobless, thanks to the stock market crash and the Dust Bowl. One of the jobs that they created for artists was with the Works Progress Administration. It paid artists to go around and take pictures and make paintings that would represent America. And Dorothea Lange was part of that, and she would go around and take photographs of people that were experiencing the Dust Bowl over in the Mid-America and Western areas. So this is a photograph of a woman and her 2 children that have been displaced because of the Dust Bowl and are on their way migrating to California, which is what many people did during that time period to try and get a job.
We can't see the presentation.
Thank you, Courtney. It always says it's sharing and then it doesn't. There you go.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting me know. And this one will pop back up a few times. It's like one of the most famous US photographs ever taken. Another artist that was part of that Works Progress Administration was Ansel Adams. Instead of taking pictures of people to represent America, though, he went to different national parks to take pictures of those. And this is one of his photographs of Yosemite National Park. What Ansel Adams would do is he would haul all of his photography equipment up to these random secluded spots in Like he did one of the desert area and this one in Yosemite, and he'd hike up there by himself with all his equipment, and he would camp out there for a few days to try and figure out what the best moment would be to capture a photograph. So kind of secluded and private. I mean, if you're into that life, then maybe you'd prefer his photograph. But yeah, he did this beautiful black and white photograph of the mist and snow on top of the mountains in Yosemite National Park. So moving on in history from black and white photography to color photography. Color photography, fun fact, has been around since 1907. It was invented by Kodiak. So yeah, it's been around for a long time, but all of the photographs that we've talked about so far, why didn't they use color photography? I mean, we were talking about photographs from the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Why not? Well, early color photography was considered to be quite garish and not pleasing to look at. So it's not until the 1970s that artists really start to take note of the idea of using color photography in their artworks. It was just considered that using black and white photography looked more refined. Color photography did not. William Eggleston helped to turn that around, though. He's the artist that made using color photography really popular. That's because he took pictures of really, really bright, eye-catching colors, and he understood his color wheel quite well. So he knew that colors like red and yellow went really well together as far as the composition. So he would often photograph the colors yellow together. In fact, one color that he always photographed was the color red, because it's one of the brightest. So here is one of William Eggleston's images, just to give you an idea of what early use of color photography would look like. Once again, he primarily captured really bright colors, and he usually just took photographs of everyday objects. This is his most famous photograph, Greenwood, Mississippi, also known as the Red Room for various reasons, which if you can catch on, good. If you can't, oops. Just keep in mind that the color red does symbolize different things. I kind of hinted at here. So this was an interesting composition choice of a ceiling with a couple of little hints in the background. And here is another William Eggleston, once again with bright colors. Moving on from Eggleston to probably the most well-known contemporary photographer today, and that is Jeff Wall. Jeff Wall is a Canadian photographer, and he's like the only Canadian artist that we ever get to talk about in this class. He does something really interesting with his photographs. Instead of printing them on like a photograph paper or anything like that, he prints his photographs on plexiglass and puts a light box behind them. What do you guys think happens when you do that? Yeah, the colors are going to be a lot brighter with the light box behind them. And he doesn't do this on a small scale either. He does this on a very large scale. So I would say his light box photographs, if you divide this in half, that's about how big they are. So they're quite large and vibrant, extra vibrant, more vibrant than you would get with a regular photograph, thanks to that light reflecting back from behind the plexiglass. So this is just okay, so Jeff Wall is a strange character. I should give you a little background information. He does like to play on stories and the ideas of stories. So he makes up little stories and he uses those stories to play out his compositions. This one is not that complex. It's just business workers with their papers flying away, and it's actually a play on this ukiyo-e print. We talked about ukiyo-e prints yesterday when we were going over woodblock prints. So this is from Japan, and it's literally just a recreation of that print. Here is another Jeff Wall. This is probably the one he's most well known for. This one you can read a lot of different things into it. What do you guys think about this one though? What do you think's happening? Start off easy. What do you think the tone is? Happy, sad? Maybe sad. What else? Stressed, maybe. What else? Thinking, maybe. Why are you guys getting that? Yeah, there's a lot of light bulbs at the top. Some of them are on, like their thoughts, because usually light bulbs symbolize a thought. A lot of them are off. That kind of helps give us the idea of maybe loneliness with a lot of lights off. He's also by himself in a very dirty, disheveled room with a bunch of piled up dirty dishes and trash. It kind of gives us the idea that he probably lives alone. Now let's move on to this one. This one's a little bit more playful. There's 3 people in this image, by the way. Everyone misses the 3rd one. This one's a fun story. I'll give you guys a few seconds to process what you think might be going on in this image. I'm actually going to blow it up a little bit better so that my people in class can get the details. So that couch in the background is striped, by the way. That's important. So what do you guys think is happening? What do you guys think is happening? Maybe an argument? Maybe. Any online thoughts?
He probably said something that shocked him. I don't know.
Maybe. Usually this one theme. Something high schoolers don't go through.
I was going to say marriage counseling.
Yeah, that's closer. This is kind of like the aftermath of the marriage counseling not working out though. So right here, that striped couch is probably the most important object in the entire room. Those stripes divide these 2 people from each other. What happens when your marriage is completely divided? What is that end result? Divorce, yes. So that's what's happening here. So you were on the right track with arguments or not getting along or him trying to convince her of something. They have just divorced. Now over here, this guy in the corner, what does he look like? What do you think his job is? Maybe a lawyer. What in the world usually wears a white shirt and a black coat?
I initially
A
thought it was
butler.
butler.
It's a butler, yeah. So it's a butler. So that tells us what about their status? They're wealthy. They have just been in a divorce. Which one of these two probably ended up with a better deal? Her. She's smiling. He, on the other hand, is not happy. So that's the story that's happening with this one. This one's fun and a little bit easier to read. And that's actually it for photography for us. Photography will end up spilling over into tomorrow's lesson with film. Like I mentioned at the beginning, it is photographs that help to create films. And we will talk about how that happens tomorrow. It's a fun little story about a bet, a gambling bet. So that's how films are invented. Keep in mind that you guys do need to finish your discussion post. If you haven't, I've gotten probably half of them in already. But those of you that have not, you have a couple more days left to do that. So you might want to get it done. You can choose any artwork, even ones we've talked about, and you can choose any medium, whichever you'd prefer. If you want to wait for tomorrow's film, you can. Tomorrow, like I said, is going to be a long lecture. It's probably going to last the entire time, which is why I left this one kind of short today, to give you guys time to work on assignments. Tomorrow, we are going to be watching films, so that should be fun. Yeah, that one's like my favorite one to do because we get to watch a bunch of movie clips, and who doesn't like doing that? Except maybe not at 8 a.m., I don't know. So yeah, we will enjoy that tomorrow. It is, in my opinion, the funnest medium to go over just because I like movies a lot. And hopefully you can enjoy it as well and join us for that. But for the rest of the period, you guys should